ahead of the financial crisis, it felt like there were deals happening left and right. And he said now people are scared of their own shadows, where, you know, the IPO market has been pretty dormant. We're not seeing that happen. So that's one reason that we're not really in bubble territory. And then, of course, so far, you know, these big tech companies, their earnings are delivering. So it's not like they're trading way past their earnings expectations. They are, you know, showing out for these very, very lofty valuations so far.
Well, we're going to start getting more earnings in the coming weeks, and we'll see if these companies continue to deliver. Alex, if we think about big picture in terms of what we're seeing from analysts this year when it comes to targets for the S&P 500, this is something you follow very closely. You write about it all the time. How have they shifted, given that we're already up 15% this year?
So people have still been raising their targets. Apparently, they're not really alarmed by the run that we've had so far. And especially after last year, getting it massively wrong. Everyone was calling for a recession, thought there would be this massive sell-off in equities that didn't happen. And so everyone now is trying to chase this rally. So, you know, there is some concern that too many people are getting on the same side of the boat. But at the same time, a lot of these targets, although they are higher, don't imply that much upside from here. It's not like people are calling for, you know, another double-digit gain from here. They're very, very modest. The highest target right now is from Julian Emanuel at Evercore, 6,000. He thinks that this AI frenzy is going to continue. Very interesting, actually, because his was 4,750. So he did a little bit of an about face there.
Come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, a little bit of a reckoning. But then there's Marko Kolanovic at 4,200. He is sticking with that. They just put out their mid-year outlook. He is not budging on his bearish call, and he's now pretty much one of the only contrarians on Wall Street.
You've got to have conviction. And,
eventually, maybe he'll be right. Maybe not 4,200, but
the grand scope of time, perhaps. You have like 1 million stories out today, so it was hard to even find this one. But one of your stories that caught my eye this morning was an interview that you had with David Kelly from JP Morgan Asset Management. And I thought that was what basically the thrust was, that it's not until we see a real shock that we can break the pattern of this market, which is just, again, relying on tech to lead the way here.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of talk about earnings growth expanding, and for the most part, people do expect that to happen, and, you know, big tech earnings to slow a little bit. And a lot of folks say that that'll help broaden things out, and we'll get, you know, some of the underperformers of this rally catching up by the end of the year. But at the same time, you know, he as well does see that earnings gap closing, but he said that the performance gap between big tech and the rest of the market is not going to close, because there is this momentum psychology happening. Investors have leaned into big tech so much, and that's been working for them. So why wouldn't they continue to allocate to a sector that has, you know, companies with very strong balance sheets, companies that have been able to weather higher interest rates?
Cash in the queues. You can't go wrong.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll leave it on that note.
Yeah.
Alexandra Semenova, Bloomberg News Equities reporter here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. This is Bloomberg.
Changing the weather, changing the weather.
Well, Jamaica could be facing up to $1 billion of damage as Hurricane Beryl churns through the Atlantic. It's the earliest ever Category 5 storm after devastating the Caribbean's Windward Islands. Beryl's breakneck intensification into a major hurricane is a grim sign for the rest of the Atlantic storm season, which is still months away from its typical peak, and the latest indication of how extreme heat driven by climate change is triggering weather disasters around the world. We got with us Bloomberg's Mark Gongloff. He's Bloomberg opinion editor who covers climate change. He's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Mark, we talk a lot about how the stock market is not the economy is not the stock market, weather is not climate change is not weather, yet these things are intertwined.
Yeah.
Please explain.
Well, there have always been hurricanes, but the thing about this hurricane is that it is a kind of literal freak of nature that is as you mentioned, the earliest Category 5 in history. The scary thing about it, maybe even scarier thing about it, is that it went from 0 to Category 4 in like less than 2 days, which has only happened like 6 previous times in history. And usually that happens in like September when the ocean water is really warm. And so we've got this thing where, yes, it's a hurricane. Yes, hurricanes happen, but the ocean water is like a bathtub. It's like September level hot right now. Part of that's El Nino. Again, El Ninos happen, but the combination of El Nino and human-made climate change has made ocean temperatures like almost literally off the charts hot. And so that is fueling this crazy storm.
And so what does that mean for the rest of hurricane season? If we're starting early, maybe we'll end early, maybe not, or maybe will this just be super intense?
Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be super intense. Before it even started, the number crunchers came up with forecasts for it that were like, again, like it was going to be a record season. 30 big storms, 7 major hurricanes, which are like category 3 or above, and that which is more than like the usual like 3. And most of those are going to affect the U.S. in some way. This one may end up affecting like Texas, and so it's the water's going to stay hot. It's not going to get any cooler until like October, November, and then this rapid intensification thing that we're seeing is another feature that we can expect throughout this season too. Unfortunately,
one thing I think about a lot, Mark, it's not climate migration, which you've shared with us before, and the idea of moving from one country to another country as a result of what's happening in your own climate, which we're seeing right now, certainly, or as the effects of what's happening with climate, but something that's happening more local. The idea of not necessarily living in a part of the country because you're concerned about fires or hurricanes, or rising insurance rates in places like California, or being dropped by your insurance in California because of fire risk, and that essentially becoming a place, for some people, that's not inhabitable because they don't want to deal with that. What happens first? Do we start to see like a reversal in what we're doing as humans to slow climate change, or do we just write off these parts of the country that get hit over and over again?
Well, apparently what happens first is everybody moves into those parts of the country really in a big way. Okay. Florida, Texas, Arizona, Phoenix, where it's like 120, people are like cooking on the streets, are the fastest growing places in the country. And so a lot of people are moving there because it's cheaper. It's going to stop. It's already stopping. That cheapness is already going away as they're discovering they can't maybe get a mortgage on their house, or insurance rates are skyrocketing, or they can't get insurance at all, or they have to clean up. And so what you're seeing is first we're going to see maybe some gentrification of some of these areas where, you know, if you're wealthy, you're going to buy a house on the coast, and if it gets knocked over, you're going to build it back up again. One of the things we maybe need to do is to stop sort of subsidizing that. Like, if that's what you want to do, cool, go for it. You know, I love the beach too, but if your house keeps getting knocked down, we don't have to pay to rebuild it. And at some point, I mean, I personally think we need to work on some sort of managed migration, some sort of managed retreat from some of these areas. But the market is sort of forcing us into that right now because we're not doing the managed stuff. We're being forced to by, oh, you can't get insurance anymore, or your house is getting knocked down, that sort of thing.
Let's talk about New Jersey.
This is so near and dear to Mark's heart.
I love to.
He loves New Jersey Transit. If you don't know this about Mark, he's got a real soft spot for New Jersey Transit.
I'm going to take you completely at face value.
Okay.
And I want to talk about New Jersey. We were talking about the commute yesterday, getting longer, costlier, and you wrote, when it comes to New Jersey Transit last week, is failing the climate test. It feels like a lot of what we're talking about, I mean, it's very local, too.
Yeah. Well, it's local, but it's also national because, you know, it blows my mind. Tim is being facetious about my love for New Jersey Transit, as you probably guessed. It makes me crazy. It has put 10 years on it has taken 10 years off of my life. But it affects the entire country because there's this 10-mile stretch between Newark and Penn Station that it has these wires, these electrical wires that were built around World War II, and it's the only place in the country that has it.
It's a piece of history, Mark.
It's a piece of history, and you can look out and gaze on it when your train is sitting there doing nothing for like 3 hours while you're waiting to move.
I think Mark says it's a piece of something.
It is a piece of something, and this is a family show, I guess, so I won't say what it is. But these wires are ancient, and when it gets hot, they sag, and they get tangled up in the trains, and then all the trains shut down. And there's a bunch of other nonsense like that. There's a bridge that you have to raise and lower every time, like anything bigger than a sailboat needs to go through, and all the traffic on the eastern seaboard shuts down. It's bananas. And so they're working on that, but it's going to take a long, long time to fix it. They're talking about like 15, 16 years to fix it, which, again, in my opinion, not just as a New Jersey Transit commuter, but just as somebody who's like, you know, this is the biggest rail line. This is also Amtrak, so it affects traffic going from D.C. to Boston. You know, this is a major artery, and if we're going to prepare for a world in which we maybe drive less, maybe burn less fossil fuels, we need better transit, and if we just want an economy that functions, if we want, you know, productivity, we want people to come into this city and go in and out and just travel, then we need to fix this much more quickly.
I think one thing that might be frustrating to some people, Mark, is that there's a huge economic part of this too. the idea that in order for a city like New York to be an engine of economic growth for a country and for a region, there needs to be reliable transit. And we haven't seen that necessarily from the agencies.
No. We haven't, and it's a big political ask, and I understand that too. I mean, my New Jersey Transit train doesn't fill up your gas tank or put cereal in your cereal bowl. You know, people are worried about inflation, that sort of thing. People have, but immediate economic concerns. The difficult thing, the political trick to turn here is to express to people just how much economic damage will happen if we don't fix this stuff now. You know, if you don't invest in mitigating climate change in the next decade, the cost of doing so will double in the decades to come. And so it is a matter of, and we're just bad at this. I'm bad at this. I'm bad at saving for, you know, retirement. I'm bad at everything, you know, saving, thinking about the future, thinking beyond what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. But we have to start thinking that way as a society. You know, how can we save money in the future by spending more now?
Mark Ongoloff, he's a must-read whenever he has a column out. He's Bloomberg opinion editor covering climate change, joining us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Headline to hit on the way out here, Donald Trump's sentencing was delayed 2 months until September 18th so that the judge can review the impact of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling about presidential immunity on the New York hush money conviction. Court officials set the new date Tuesday after Trump's team asked for the delay as part of his bid to overturn his conviction on 34 felony counts. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision on Monday came in the federal criminal case against Trump for overturning the 2020 election results, but his New York lawyers contend it covers some evidence and testimony in that hush money case. Much more Business Week on the other side. A check on the New York City real estate market. This is Bloomberg.
3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the S&P 500 index right around 5,500. NASDAQ on track for a record close, potentially first close ever above 18,000. We've got NASDAQ right now up by about 0.7%, gaining 123 points. S&P up 23, up 0.4. The Dow up 99. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. Russell 2000 turning around in the green, up now by 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.43% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.74%. Gold down 0.1%, 23.29 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 82.92 for a barrel of WTI. Fed Chair Jay Powell says the latest economic data suggests inflation is getting back on a downward path, but emphasized officials need more evidence before lowering rates. Here's Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking at the ECB forum in Sintra, Portugal.
We just want to understand that the levels that we're seeing are a true reading on what is actually happening with underlying inflation. And as we were saying at the last part of last year, people were saying, you need to declare victory, this is over. And then we had a quarter of inflation which was well above 3%. So we want to be more confident, and frankly, because the U.S. economy is strong and the labor market is strong, we have the ability to take our time and get this right. And that's what we're planning to do.
Fed Chair Jay Powell. Briefly, a source tells Bloomberg the Federal Trade Commission is poised to suit a block Tempur Sealy International's $4 billion proposed deal with mattress firm. Right now, we got shares of Tempur trading higher by 1.1%. So again, recapping here, S&P up 24, 54.99, up 0.4%. NASDAQ at a record. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate that. New York's housing market facing the tightest squeeze in 5 decades, and little relief is in sight. A rental vacancy rate of just 1.4% is pushing the cost of living in New York City higher. And last month, developers filed the fewest permits in a decade to build new multifamily buildings. Experts fear it all adds up to a bleak reality for the most populous U.S. city. Soon, New York may price out all but the very wealthy. Someone who's got a front row seat to everything happening in New York City real estate is Frances Katzen. She's founder of the Katzen team at Douglas Elliman. She's back with us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. When Charlie was talking about the yield on the 10-year, you were like shaking your head.
Yeah.
Because certainly mortgage rates follow the 10-year. But
correct.
To be fair, a lot of your clients don't take mortgages.
Well, I mean, we just saw a huge barometer about that, right?
Yeah.
We saw the market from basically 4 million to 4.995 go down 59.2% in May, and then basically uptick to 57% in non-movement, meaning nothing's happening. Every other segment has this sort of movement, but the 10-year Treasury yield used to basically track the 30-year fix. Now we're at 7% on average. It's very stressful because the people that need that amount of borrowed leverage to get into the upper movement, and there's an opportunity to get in much less, can't make it happen. And that's the 59.3% reduction of non-trading in that segment. Nuts.
Well, when it comes to the people who are moving, I forget how many Ds there are, but divorce, death, diamonds, diapers, that's another one.
Diamonds? Oh,
yeah,
for when you get married?
Yeah, and then they buy a house or an apartment or whatever. The people who are still moving, specifically in New York, I mean, are they moving because they have to, or are we seeing things loosen up on that front?
Those are the only movements, and they're far and few between because most are renting. That's why you're seeing a 40.5% uptick in rental. It's the highest amount of leases signed year over year in like the 6th increase in like 7 months. Nuts. So I think some are buying, but some are priced out or simply can't get their head around a 7% versus a 2.5%.
I want to talk a little bit more about the rental market because I actually recently moved.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I moved like 2 weeks ago. I had wanted to buy a year ago. I quickly discarded that dream. And then we found this apartment, and the listing price or the price per month was just a little bit too high. So we said, we'll pay you $500 less per month, And they said, okay, great, it's yours, which I was really surprised about. I know that it's just anecdata, but what is the state of the rental market? I mean, it seems like rents are still going up, but then you hear stories like mine.
Well, you're lucky, is what I can say, because what we're dealing with is multiple applications that are cannibalizing. Yeah, I just did it at 450 East 83rd Street. We had 7 apps, and one is over $500 more, actually. We rented it above the ask. The concessions are still very little. There's 27.5% more inventory now on the rent side, and I suspect because people don't want to take less than what they want for a sale, so they're basically converting. I think you're the anomaly, honestly. I think there's such a tight... Look, it's a double-edged sword. It's like way overpriced rental, or who can help you get the hit to make the numbers work until there's a refi that takes place maybe at the end of the year or first quarter of next year. I don't know.
Yeah, I will say, I think we were lucky. I promise it's a nice apartment that we moved into, but...
Manhattan?
Oh yeah, Upper East Side.
Well, that's one of the segments that's sort of very interesting, actually, for opportunity.
Well, tell me more. I mean, I already signed my lease and we're moved in, but interesting in what way?
Depending on how far east you are from the west side of the east side, if that even makes sense, there's a little bit more negotiability, because I think that people want to be close to their commute. So there's a little bit less desirability, and a lot of that product may be not as desirable based on post-war, lower ceiling, not particularly the main event in terms of inventory. You're competing with a lot more newer product. There seems to be a nice opportunity for family-centric need next to schools to get in on the Upper East Side.
Where are you seeing activity?
Downtown, the usual. Brooklyn, oh my gosh, on fire.
Please, keep going.
Brooklyn
Is
fire,
on
Tim.
fire.
I've been saying this for years. It's where all the cool people live.
It really is.
Yeah.
I'm
No, I
feeling
think it's
very
the Upper
uncool
East
these-
Side that's popping relative to Brooklyn.
I don't know.
Please,
Brooklyn's got
Francis,
it going
continue.
on.
What's going on with Brooklyn?
It's exceeding price per square foot demand. People used to walk in and say, I want to look at West Village, Tribeca, and maybe Flatiron. Now
and now
they're
they
like,
say Cobble Hill.
they'll do
Carroll
West
Gardens.
Village and Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And they'll do Greenpoint, or they'll do, Carroll Gardens, or they'll do Williamsburg, whatever. But it's no longer this outlier. It's part of the downtown
I will
vibe.
say, walking around Williamsburg in this day and age is like
It's
walking
lit.
around the West Village.
Not
in terms of, or maybe Soho in terms of retail. Not in terms of the character by any means, but in terms of what retail is there. It's pretty incredible.
It's incredible. Those restaurants, the vibe, the indie feel of it, the independent nature of these stores, and in Greenpoint, it's cool. It's got it going on. And the pricing's only getting stronger.
When your lease expires, you can move to Brooklyn, Katie.
In 2 years?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I think I'm going to New Jersey after that. But, I mean, after the segment ends, I'll tell you exactly where I moved. But I do want to clarify. I mean, we got a deal on this apartment, but I will say when we were looking around, maybe a little bit closer to the Bloomberg office, there were bidding wars for rental apartments.
Thank you.
We toured one beautiful apartment, and then we followed up later that night over email, and they said, tell us what you would be willing to pay, because everyone who saw it today wants it.
Wait, it was like best and final?
Yes, best and final for a rental.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
what happens. That's what's happening right now on all of my product. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean,
Nuts.
how does this end? I mean, how do things get better?
So it's a really good question, right? It's like the chicken or the egg. I think that, so here's the dilemma. Right now, nobody is really buying at the same pace that they did in 2021 and 2022, right? So there's this inherent opportunity to get in at a wholesale price and really buy up. The big issue for most is how to tolerate that really high carry. So my advice is you don't want to be buying when everybody else is buying, because there is no inherent value to that. You're basically paying upmarket pricing based on supply and demand. So you can refi, and you can always refi. You can't refinance the purchase. And so the refi becomes the play. How long do you have to carry that higher number? And to me, that's the inherent value.
I've heard higher for longer in certain places, mainly this studio and from Jay Powell and company.
Out on the street? Is that
Out on the
what
street,
you're talking about in
much.
Brooklyn?
No, we don't talk about it in Brooklyn.
No.
That's
hey,
a dirty
Francis, before we let you go, I'm curious about where people move when they do list apartments with you. Where are they going?
Out of here.
Like
Yeah.
New Jersey, like Katie said?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
We've got people, yeah, I mean, some of it is New Jersey, some of it is Florida, some of it is going to be in Westchester. I mean, it's like they want to get out of the city. These are people who've had their run and they want to cash out. Or they're at a time in their life where they don't want to do stairs anymore, literally big, finance players who just were like, I've got too much real estate, I want to size down, but I want to take a rental and stay near my kids in the city, but I'm going out, I'm going to go get something somewhere else.
That's interesting.
I wasn't that specific on that one because
That's
they're
okay.
all so different.
Specifically stairs, though? They don't want to go up and down the stairs?
Some, very interesting, yeah. We're getting to the point where we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And they're perfectly fine, but it's like,
I feel like young parents, too, who lift strollers up and down stairs, they do that for a little while, and then they're like, I'm done.
I'm done.
It's over.
Yeah.
The townhouse is gone. in
Actually,
Brooklyn.
yeah, the townhouses. They're beautiful from the outside, but in terms of practicality.
Don't leave your keys on the top floor.
Yes, yeah. Hey, Frances, always good to see you.
Really nice
Thanks,
to see you,
Thanks
Tim.
for joining
Thanks.
us. That's
Thank you.
Frances Katzen of the Katzen team. She's the founder of the Katzen team over at Douglas Elliman. We got much more at Bloomberg Business Week coming up as we get ready to drive to the close. We are seeing stocks higher today. The S&P 500 up 0.5 percentage point. The NASDAQ higher by 0.7%. Up next, we're going to drive to the close with Sonu Varghese over at the Carson Group. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and actually the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. We can talk trade if you want. Donald Trump's sentencing, however, was set for next week. It's been moved now to September 18th. Prosecutors say they would not oppose putting the sentencing on hold in light of the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. Bloomberg's Eric Larson says the former president will most likely argue.
Some of the evidence and testimony used in the hush money case in New York, the trial that he already lost, shouldn't have been used because it was protected by immunity. These could relate to some tweets that he sent while president that related to the hush money case. Could also relate to certain witnesses that testified in the hush money trial.
Eric Larson speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew. Democratic Representative Lloyd Doggett of Texas is the first in his party to publicly call for President Biden to step down as the Democratic nominee for president, releasing a statement saying Biden should make the difficult decision to just withdraw. ABC says President Biden will be interviewed by George Stephanopoulos this Friday. That'll be his first interview since Thursday's debate. And President Biden has unveiled new rules to protect millions of workers from extreme heat, the deadliest form of extreme weather, killing hundreds of Americans each year. President Biden saying the threat is just getting worse amid the climate crisis.
Everyone who willfully denies the impacts of climate change is condemning the American people to a dangerous future and either is really, really dumb or has some other motive.
If finalized, the rule will establish the nation's first ever federal safety standard for excessive heat exposure in the workplace and protect as many as 36 million indoor and outdoor workers. It also requires employers to establish heat safety coordinators, undergo extreme heat safety training, and create emergency heat response plans. And everybody gets shade and water, especially, of course, if you're working outside. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index. Yes, Russell 2000 as well. Solidly in the green. Could see some records at the close. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks in the green with an afternoon bid. The Dow is currently up 126 points. S&Ps are higher by 25, and NASDAQ rises by 0.7% and hits the 18,000 mark. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.44%. Gold is down 3, oil trading in the red, and Bitcoin, that's lower by 1.9%. Among the main 11 SP sectors, leaders were consumer discretionary and the financials. Healthcare and energy were under pressure, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Amazon and Apple, while Verizon fell 1.7% and led to the downside. In the EV space, Tesla rose 9% after Q2 deliveries beat estimates. Rivian deliveries also beat estimates. And in deal news, Paramount is said to be in talks to sell its BET network for $1.6 billion. Wrapping things up, Amazon traded to an all-time high. It IPO'd back in 1997. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type SQUAK, S-Q-U-A, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Well, we just heard the numbers from Charlie Pellet and Bill Maloney. The Dow higher by 0.4%. The S&P 500 higher by 0.5 percentage point. The NASDAQ higher by 0.7%.
You led with the Dow.
Yeah, I'm just in order.
You guys do things different over here.
No, I don't always lead with the Dow.
Yeah, I always lead with the S&P 500.
Well, that's pretty cool, Katie.
Yeah.
You're in our house now.
I start large and then I go small with the
Okay.
Russell 2000 is what I typically do.
Cool. What are your thoughts on the market today, on the trade?
You know what I'm going to say? It's pretty quiet out there, you know.
Actually seen volume down.
Absolutely. I mean, this time yesterday, volume was a little bit actually above average, and I think that's the last day this week that we're going to see that because things quiet down from here, theoretically.
Okay, well, let's see what Sonu Varghese has to say. Sonu's a vice president and global macro strategist at the Carson Group. Sonu, it's good to have you with us for our drive to the close. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be on.
Thanks so much for joining us. What do you see out there beyond this week? I mean, certainly, I think it's fair to say it could be a quiet week when it comes to trading, not so quiet when it comes to economic news and Fed speakers. But as you look at the 15% rise that we've seen in the first half of the year, what does the second half portend?
I think momentum is one thing. So momentum begets momentum is like what I like to think of, how I like to think about markets. And we've had a lot of that, right from Q4 of last year into Q1. We had a bit of a hurdle in April, and then things came back. I mean, one thing that's happening is the market's gone up, but it's gone up on the back of earnings too. Out of the 15% gain over the first half of the year, more than half, a little over a half, has come from earnings growth and dividends, right? So about 7 to 7.5% plus another 0.80 basis points or so has come from dividend growth. And so I think that's what's powering markets higher. And next week we start again with earnings season. One thing that's interesting is forward earnings expectations have been rising. And on the back of margins too, margins have been a big part of that. I think that's what continues to drive the market higher.
So I definitely hear what you're saying, that you think about the fundamentals, you think about the earnings picture, and it really helps justify what we're seeing at the broad benchmark level. But you think about forward earnings expectations. I mean, when do expectations just get too rosy? When does that bar just get too high and you start to see companies actually start to disappoint?
I think companies are good at playing this game, at the expectations game too, right? So as we get into earnings season, just before earnings, you can see that maybe forward expectations tamp down a little bit, and then it sort of slows down. One thing that's kind of been surprising over the last 4 weeks, really since the end of earnings season, forward expectations have actually gone up even more. So one thing I'm watching is, do companies come in and say, wait a minute, you're stretched a little too far, analysts, all of you, and maybe pull that back a little bit, right? So because at the end of the day, I think companies try to meet expectations on the earnings call on the day of the earnings. So I think they know how to play that game. So, I think from that front, it'll be a gradual shift, if anything, if at all, right? We just may not see a continued ramp up in forward earnings expectations as we have seen, but I don't think they go down unless, look, when nominal GDP growth is running around 4.5 to 5.5%, that's a strong backdrop for earnings growth.
Okay, from earnings, I want to go to the labor market because we got JOLTS job openings, labor turnover survey results today at 10 o'clock. We actually saw that come in higher than estimated. It's a little bit of, quite a bit of strength in the labor market, not entirely Fed friendly. How are you looking at the labor market?
I think it's more, I would characterize the JOLTS report. I mean, you look at openings of the total story, the totality of openings, hires, quits, layoffs, all of it. It was a bit of, actually, yes, openings went up to about just over 8 million, but otherwise it was a bit of a snoozer, wasn't it? With hires, didn't move. It moved up to 3.6%, the hiring rate. The quit rate was around 2.2% as well. Layoffs remained really low, around 1.5, 1.6 million, about 1% as a percentage of the employed workforce. So more of the same. I think one thing that we're seeing is hiring has eased a lot, right, from last year and even let alone 2 years ago. But why is net employment high? It's because separations are low. Quits are low, layoffs are low. I think, like Powell said today in Sintra, that the labor market has eased, has cooled off, but it's happening gradually, right? It's not happening suddenly. That's a good thing. So that keeps them on track. At the same time, I think they are aware, bring the Fed back into this, they are aware of the double-sided risk, right? The risk that they don't act and the labor market weakens even more, and that becomes a snowball, an avalanche eventually, versus the risk of undoing all the gains they made on inflation so far. So I think they're aware of both sides.
And just one quick point on the JOLTS stat. I thought it was interesting. You bring up the quits rate. It's been 2.2% for several readings in a row. So it's been interesting to watch that line pretty much do nothing. But zooming out a little bit, of course, we're talking about the labor market. We're talking about the economy. And that follows our conversation on earnings. And I'm curious, from where you're sitting, what is this market responding to? Are we really just paying attention and being driven by those corporate earnings? Or is this still a Fed-driven, a macro-driven market at this point?
Between Q1 and Q2, I would say it was definitely in response to earnings, because earnings have come out so strong. Especially if you look at Q1, at the end of Q1, the S&P was up about 10%. Most of that, about 7 percentage points, came from valuations. You can think of that like sentiment, right? And 3 percentage points or thereabouts from earnings growth. Now, fast forward one more quarter, the S&P is up about 15%. More than half of it has come from earnings growth, right? So it was an earnings growth, and I should mention margins too that powered that. Now, again, not to ignore, these things are all correlated, right? It's not like earnings is happening in a vacuum and the economy is doing something else. No, the economy is also doing fine. You're seeing disinflation too. So I think markets are expecting the Fed to, drop rates on the back of those disinflationary trends, which I think the Fed probably got spooked a little bit by the Q1 data, but as Powell said today, the disinflationary trend is back on. I mean, from our perspective, I don't know if we ever got out of the disinflationary trend. It was just for various idiosyncratic reasons that Q1 inflation came in hot, but we got to follow what the Fed says, right? So.
All right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And we didn't even really get to the politics of it all. But unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks, of course, to Sonu Varghese of the Carson Group. And Tim, I mean, we do sit at a really interesting juncture in markets. I know I've been downplaying this action all week, but it's going to be interesting to see what the second half brings.
All I'm going to say, Katie, could be an S&P 500 record. NASDAQ 100 record.
Wow.
NASDAQ composite record at the close today.
What about the Dow?
Not a record.
No.
No, not a record on the Dow today. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. PG&E has cut power to about 2,000 homes and businesses in Northern California as triple-digit temperatures, strong winds, and low humidity heighten the risk of wildfires. The utility said it preemptively shut power across small areas of 8 counties and 1 tribal community. PG&E shares on an update for the rest of the market. PG&E down now by 0.5%. Matt Garman is 30 days into the job as CEO of Amazon Web Services, and he spoke with Bloomberg Radio and Television this morning about a number of topics, including getting renewable energy to data centers.
If you rewind even several years ago, we're the single largest purchaser of renewable energy in the world for many years in a row now. And part of that is we saw this coming, and we've been thinking about how do we build up enough power in a sustainable way that's carbon neutral, that we can support the energy needs for technology. And so we think that growth is going to be significant, and there's a lot of work that's going to go forward in continuing to make sure that we have enough power to power the workloads that our customers need.
Matt Garman of Amazon Web Services. Amazon shares, by the way, trading at a record today. Right now, they are up by 1.3%. Sources tell Bloomberg TotalEnergies plans to exit its discoveries of gas condensate off the tip of South Africa to prioritize exploration in other areas closer to Namibia. ADRs of TotalEnergies up by 0.1%. Eli Lilly's Alzheimer's treatment has been cleared in the U.S. as the second drug to slow progression of the mind-robbing disease. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Kitty Greifeld in for Carol Massar this afternoon. I'm Tim Stenevec. We just got a couple minutes to get to the close. We're going to be joined by our TV team for our cross-platform coverage of the closing bell. Right here on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Before we get to that, though, Katie, let's talk about Jay-Z.
Let's talk about Jay-Z. He's backing a luxury watch trading platform. It's called WristCheck. He's a hip-hop musician, in case you're
excuse me?
Unfamiliar with Jay-Z.
He does hip-hop?
He does hip-hop music. He's a rapper, you could say.
Some might call him a legend.
Yeah, some might. Well, he's become the latest celebrity backer of the online watch market. He took an equity stake in the luxury trading platform WristCheck. Now, Jay-Z, he's a well-known collector of rare and valuable watches from brands...
Like Patek Philippe?
I was hoping that you would pronounce
Audemars Piguet?
Yeah, I don't have the best accent.
Among others.
Yeah.
He participated in a recent funding round?
He sure did, about $5 million, according to the Hong Kong-based company.
Okay, so did you mention Ronaldo?
I haven't gotten there yet, no.
So a slew of other celebrity watch trading investors, including Ronaldo, who's invested in Chrono 24. We're not watch people, you and me, are we?
No, I feel like
you're wearing a Garmin watch.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think those are seen as luxury.
To me, it's
my wife has that same watch, too.
Yeah, I love it. It's it's good looking.
It's a great watch.
Yeah.
Gives you a lot of information, but it's not quite a...
You don't think that
Audemars
those
Piguet.
are trading on WristCheck?
I don't think they are.
Man.
What I think is interesting, though, is that there's been this rocky period for pre-owned watch marketplaces and sellers amid a sharp decline in secondhand watch values since April of 2022. When you and I were talking a lot about meme stocks back in the day.
Yeah, those dark days.
The good old days.
Yeah, jeez.
Watches were
soaring
in value.
It's a really interesting market to track because it does have that sort of frothy element. They were popping off at the same time that meme stocks were. But then, I mean, it's also a really interesting read into a luxury market as well because we're talking, I mean, the watches that Jay-Z is buying and collecting.
The hip-hop musician Jay-Z?
The hip-hop musician Sean Carter, known as Jay-Z. I have to imagine that his collection is pretty nice.
Yeah, I bet it is. He's also got a pretty great art collection. Hey, keep it here because coming up next, it's our countdown to the close, the closing bell coverage with our TV team, simulcast on TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. That's happening right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
We're about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Scarlett Fu and Alex Steele here, and of course here to take you through the closing bell with a global simulcast. We're joined now by Tim Stenovic and Katie Greifeld, bringing together our Bloomberg television, radio, and YouTube audiences worldwide to parse through the most crucial moments of the trading day. Right now, Tim, I'm looking at indexes at their session highs, save the Russell, but that's usually the case, and the VIX now below 12, so low volatility and a melt up.
Yeah, Katie was in here a little earlier talking about this being, I think she said, a boring week.
A little bit of a snoozer.
And I gotta say, not so much of a snoozer when it comes to fresh highs for the NASDAQ 100, NASDAQ Composite, S&P 500. That's the direction we're going in right now. Yeah, volume's a little light.
But that's the thing,
Tuesday.
is that we're at all-time highs. Volatility is so low. I saw some stat today that it's been 300 trading sessions since we saw a move of 2% or more to the downside. You think of just the volatility that seems like it's just vanished from the market.
Yeah, and we were just talking to a technical analyst that said you may see volatility towards the election, but from now until the end, forget it. And that's why you have like Lori Calvasina talking about the nervous jumpy bull and upgrading her forecast for this year.
The jumpy bull.
Yeah, you know, yeah, the nervous and jumpy bull. That's how she categorizes herself. On the same day that you see Truist talking about that the rally deserves the benefit of the doubt, but none of that feels like super, super strong conviction, guys.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And I guess in the absence of super high conviction and people waiting for any kind of clue from the Fed or from the data with the jobs number coming out on Friday, we're just kind of slowly pushing the indexes higher.
And speaking of, there are the closing bells. You're looking at record highs for the NASDAQ 100, and the S&P. Volume pitifully light, but we're definitely seeing the records all across the board. You have the NASDAQ finishing up by 0.8%, the S&P up about 0.6%, the Dow up 0.4%, Tim.
Okay, so far, year to date, the S&P 500 is 15.5% higher. Taking a look under the layers of the S&P 500, we did see 343 stocks, everything's still getting settled. Moving to the upside, 159 declining today, Scarlett.
All right, I'm looking at the sectors, the IMAP, and what you'll notice is a lot of green. There are some red spots, so let's focus on the decliners. You've got healthcare down about 0.4%, and energy losing 1/5%. Interestingly, oil prices started the day higher before erasing their gains and finishing lower. Among the big advancers, consumer discretionary and financials, each gaining more than 1%. Consumer discretionary getting a boost from Tesla. Communication services also up by 0.8%.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of those stocks that were pushing IMAP segments into the green today. I do want to start with shares of Tesla, finishing the day higher by more than 10%. They extended their gains for a 6th day in a row. It's the longest winning streak in about a year. The company earlier today did report deliveries for the second quarter that beat the average analyst estimates. They were not higher than they were a year ago, though. Sales were down 4.8% from a year ago. Tesla did improve when it came to a sequential basis in the vehicles that were delivered in the vehicles that were delivered in the first 3 months of the year. Tesla's up a little over 25% just in the last 6 sessions. Still down, though, about 8% so far this year. Not the only EV stock moving higher today. Shares of Rivian also moved higher. Speaking of car deliveries, beating estimates. Shares higher today by about 7%. Rivian shares soaring after the company reported deliveries for the second quarter that beat its own expectations and Wall Street estimates. Look at these numbers, though. Delivered 13,790 vehicles. They did see deliveries between 13,000 and 13,300. So a really small number compared to other players in the vehicle space, and certainly compared to Tesla. Rivian's still down more than 30% so far this year. And finally, Paramount Global shares gained after Bloomberg News reported that the company is in exclusive talks to sell BET to buyers that include BET CEO Scott Mills and Chen Chu, who run the private equity firm CC Capital. Paramount shares were also higher earlier in the session. This was after the New York Times reported that Barry Diller was considering making a bid. When is this going to be bought? Because I know, right? Think about all the different companies and individuals who've circled this company. That
hasn't been mentioned.
Yeah, well, exactly. I was talking to Paul Sweeney, recovering media investment banker for media, and I was like, if you're in this stock, why are you still in it? And he's like, you're just waiting for the $20 share bid. And And it's just like
waiting and waiting.
I mean, everybody, it's pretty remarkable what we've seen. It's been sort of around the world, right?
Eventually, that story will reach its conclusion, maybe sometime soon. We'll have to keep watching that one. Let's move on to some of the decliners, though. Have to talk about NVIDIA, of course. Biggest points contributor to the downside on the S&P 500 today. Don't have a good reason why, but I will note NVIDIA, of course, has run into some turbulence over the past couple weeks. Since June 18th, this stock is down nearly 10%. And you think about the S&P 500 still hitting record highs, maybe speaks to how resilient this market has been. So that is the biggest company, one of the biggest companies out there. Let's talk about some little ones. I did want to talk about First Watch, actually, or rather, let me go back to Webtoon, because Webtoon, it IPO'd last week. It might not be familiar to our audience yet. It's an online comics company listed last week. It had quite a debut, but shares are taking a little bit of a dive today, down about 7% on the day. And we'll end with First Watch. So this is a restaurant group. You had shares fall as much as 6.2%. That's after Stifel cut its price target to a street low, basically citing concerns about foot traffic. So it's been interesting to watch that worries about the consumer work its way into some of these specific names as well.
All right, looking at the bond market here, you're seeing definitely a bid. Yields coming down, particularly a little bit there in the back end. I mean, not a ton of news here, guys. We've seen a sell-off over the last few days, so no surprise that you might see some buying. We were talking yesterday about the 10-year hits 4.5%. Maybe that could bring in some of the buyers. We were talking, guys, to PIMCO's Tony Crescenzi, and he's like, go for the yields on high-quality bonds. They're attractive enough. It doesn't really matter when the Fed cuts rates. Don't focus on the timing. It's going to happen. Just be patient.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit, guys, and talk about something that's a little more close to home, I think, maybe for Alex and me and Katie, Scarlett, you too, of course. I think we all consider ourselves New Yorkers.
Kind of froze you out there, though.
Well, I live in the suburbs, so I get why he did that.
Somewhat. But, you spend a lot of time in New York City. You've heard a lot about the financial constraints facing the city, and over the last 4 years, the concerns about the city's budget. We've seen closures of libraries on certain days here in New York City, trash collection getting curbed, the frequency of that. Well, it turns out for a fourth year in a row, NYC's finances keep beating the doomsayers, and it's just not as bad when it comes to the budget as originally thought, Katie.
Yeah, the final budget is going to be $112 billion for the fiscal year that started on Monday. So the good news is that that's going to help the libraries open up again, and in addition, give some of the cultural institutions back some of the money that had been part of the cuts.
And trash pickup will be resumed, and that's important, obviously, for everyone, as well as early childhood programs will recover about 3/4 of the planned $400 million in cuts that they had put in place or were about to put in place.
Is this just all taxes? Like they just made more in taxes over the last 3 years than they thought? Is that what this is?
Part of it had to do with that, but part of it had to do with restrictions that were put on limiting stays of migrants because there was so much spending on migrants in the city.
So they spent less on that, and they had a little bit more money left over.
Yeah, exactly, less than they anticipated.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. We talk about how this was a pretty bullish day for anyone who was long the stock market, except if you had a lot of exposure to the likes of Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk, because President Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders published an editorial today talking about how they need to lower the cost of their anti-obesity drugs, and if they don't do it on their own, we will do it. We will do everything in our power to end it for them. My contention on this is for people who are having a difficult time getting the prescriptions for these anti-obesity drugs, they're going to the synthetic forms, right? They're going to the compounded versions of the drugs, which are a lot cheaper than what Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk charge.
Also, it just raises questions, and I don't actually know the answer to this, but how other countries wind up pricing drugs, because if it's a socialized medical system, is the government in essence just paying for it, in which case you're paying for it through taxes, and this is a different way of offsetting it? Like I literally don't understand how that works. So is it an apple to apples comparison?
And one of the companies that has just, made so much money from this is Novo Nordisk, which is not based in the U.S. So you wonder to what extent the Biden administration has the same power that it would have over an Eli Lilly, which is based in Indianapolis.
These are all really good points. I will say there was some a little bit of pushback from the sell side. If you take a look at Mizuho's reaction, they said that when you think about the benefits that these drugs bring and the fact that, it is an injectable, those tend to cost a little bit more. The price of around $1,000 a month actually seems very inexpensive. Obviously, $1,000 a month, that a lot of people right now can't afford that. But again, just thinking about it holistically and how much other drugs cost, it was interesting to hear a different perspective there.
Also, an editorial in USA Today is how the president and then Senator Bernie Sanders communicated this to people.
It's an election year, man.
Talking to the people.
Yeah.
Talking to the people.
It certainly is. Hey, are you guys going to be here tomorrow at same time, same place?
Yeah, we'll be here.
Really?
But we won't be together, but we'll be here on TV.
Yeah.
Same place, but different time.
Okay, typically what I say here on a Tuesday afternoon would be, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. But we got a holiday shortened trading day coming up tomorrow. So we're going to take a little break from our closing bell coverage, but it'll be a little bit different. So we'll see you tomorrow, not at the same time, but the same place. Have a good holiday, everyone. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Think about it for a second, Katie. Games are everywhere we look.
They are. Yeah, they're on your phone.
Okay.
And that's really the only place I look, actually.
I'm not just talking about good old-fashioned competition when you play Monopoly or something, or sports or video games. I think we can call video games old-fashioned now.
I think
right?
so.
Okay. Restaurants and apps offer us deals or allow us to level up by using a service. Maybe you wear a sleep tracker and you look at that sleep score, trying to get it higher to get more sleep. Cyclists and maybe runners, do you do this as a runner?
Oh, yeah.
Are you obsessed with comparing your times on certain Strava segments?
Not as much. I will say I do wear a Garmin, as we've discussed. And yeah, I mean, if you're not quantifying your life, what's the point?
Well, every week here at Bloomberg, we fight for ephemeral glory against our colleagues in the Bloomberg News Quiz on the Bloomberg Terminal. Needless to say, there are games everywhere. And Kelly Clancy has just written an entire book about games, but not necessarily the way that I'm talking about. She's a neuroscientist, physicist, and author. She's held research positions at MIT, UC Berkeley, the AI research company DeepMind, and more. Her new book is called Playing with Reality: How Games Have Shaped Our World. Kelly, how are you?
Good, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, congratulations on the book. How do you define game?
So I think of a game as a system that's endowed with a goal, and players involved in the game have to abide by certain rules to get to the goal. So, for example, with golf, the goal is to get a hole in a ball in the hole, but you can't just pick the ball up and walk it over to the hole. You have to hit it with funny sticks and abide by certain rules.
And so, Kelly, I mean, you make the argument that games have been really important to human progress, and that's a big statement. So maybe just unpack what you mean by that. Like, what have been some of the pivotal games out there that have advanced humanity to where we're sitting today?
Yeah, so if you look at the history of games in humanity, we actually have evidence of games going back further than written language. And actually, it's not just a human endeavor, of course. Like, almost all animals play. Mammals play. It's very hard to find animals that don't play in some form. So it's this kind of evolutionarily ancient behavior, and something really important. I was working at DeepMind, and this company is famous for having created AI programs that play really complex games like Go or StarCraft at expert human levels. And I was wondering why it was that a company would be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on training programs to play games. Like, what is so compelling that animals across different evolutionary genuses and humans throughout history have been so drawn to games? And you can think of games as basically something that the brain created to fascinate itself. It's a kind of self-stimulation for the brain. And so, we can ask the question, what can we learn about people by studying something that fascinates them? And of course, games are completely fascinating to people. We have people with gambling addictions. We have, histories of games being outlawed by kings before being so popular. So the general question was, what can we learn about the brain and people and human behavior by studying games?
Well, what can we learn? Because you also argue in the book that games can be dangerous. And so I'm curious how games become dangerous.
Yeah. So games are in part compelling because the whole MO of the brain is to create models of the world. It's trying to predict what's happening in the world. It wants to be able to anticipate, events coming up. And so the brain is trying to make models of the world, and anything that's kind of it's uncertain, like anything random that it hasn't modeled, is like a big red flag to the brain that like that's something I don't understand and I want to learn more about it. And games are all about uncertainty. If you think about tic-tac-toe, little kids will play tic-tac-toe until they realize that it always ends in a draw.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. Wait, I'm actually going through this experience with my 5-year-old right now.
Oh, yeah? The one who wanted to go to the library?
Yeah, which is a true story, Katie.
Yeah, for sure.
I would always tell a true story. I thought people can win tic-tac-toe. Is it always ending in a draw?
Are you just beating him?
No, it's always ending in a draw right now.
Oh.
And I'm like, when is one of us going to win?
I'm not sure which is more embarrassing potentially, but Kelly, please go on.
Save me.
Well, if you play it perfectly, it always ends in a draw. So if you play it like the most optimally you can, it can win. It can end in a win if one player is very naive and they don't really know the right strategy.
That's right, 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Wow.
You show them.
Wrecked.
Yeah.
But
so
when
it's sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, it's just so yeah. Games are interesting, and as far as they're uncertain, unsure. There's something there's a sense that we're learning something from them, and this can be kind of hijacked by things like gambling or dice, where there's a sense of learning. There's a random signal that the brain is really compelled to, drawn to, but you never really learn anything from it because gambling is, a random event. And so, this is true of animals as well. They can become addicted literally to random processes, to dice. So this is the danger of games, is that they can sort of draw us in and keep us enthralled.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about a border collie. If you teach a border collie how to play fetch, it will never stop wanting to play fetch. So it's definitely dangerous from that perspective as well, Kelly. But talk to us a little bit about game theory, for example. And when I think game theory, I think of the military, honestly. I think of war. And when you talk about how games could be dangerous, I mean, is that one of the avenues potentially, or is that too far of a stretch?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So game theory is a field of mathematics that was founded by John von Neumann, who was a mathematician living in the last century, who fled Europe as Hitler was coming to power and became really obsessed with the question of how do we kind of mathematically analyze human behavior? Are there ways that we can work out what truly rational behavior would look like? And he used games as his sort of field of study, because you can think of life as a game where we're making decisions, trying to achieve some goal, and working towards it, and maybe playing against other people in the game of life. So game theory is a beautiful realm of mathematics that has become the foundation for a lot of modern economics, and also has become foundational for a lot of sort of military policies. When John von Neumann was working, he was also working on the nuclear bomb. And with the advent of nuclear weapons, we suddenly had war that was happening at a much faster timescale. It could, the course of history could change in a matter of minutes or hours. And so game theory was promised to be this new kind of technology or science of decision-making, where it could aid military officers in making these sort of history-changing decisions in a matter of minutes. So it was promised to be the synthetic rationality.
Kelly, would you consider endless scroll on social media platforms and the way that TikTok's algorithm works? Would you define that or categorize that as a part of gaming?
I think it takes certain aspects from gamification where you're trying to kind of grab the attention of users or players as much as possible. And the novelty of a social media feed is exactly the same thing as like rolling a dice. So I think it is in many ways gamified, yeah.
I wonder about the idea of like likes
Yeah.
and sort of checking back to see if I see you nodding, Kelly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think likes, on Reddit, you can actually literally like get coins and all kinds of
You can get gold, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Katie, what's
so
your
you're
Reddit
getting
handle?
scored.
I will never tell.
Oh.
No.
We'll find out one of these days.
One day.
Hey, Kelly, really appreciate you joining us on Bloomberg Business Week. The book, it's out now. It's called Playing with Reality, How Games Have Shaped Our World. Kelly Clancy is a neuroscientist, a physicist, an author. She's held research positions at MIT, UC Berkeley, and the AI research company DeepMind. Once again, the book Playing with Reality, How Games Have Shaped Our World. It's Bloomberg Business Week. Up next, we are speaking with an astronaut. Katie Coleman joins us right after this on Business Week.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Records on Wall Street today for the S&P 500 index, the NASDAQ Composite Index, and yes, the NASDAQ 100 index. That index closed above 20,000 for the first time today at 20,011, up today by 1%. NASDAQ, the Composite Index, with a close above 18,000, up 149 points, up 0.8%. The S&P 500 index also at a record, closing at 5509, up 33 points today, a gain of 0.6%. The Dow advanced 162, up by 0.4%. 10-year 4.43%, with the 2-year yielding 4.74%. Gold down 0.1%, 23.29 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude 83.06 a barrel, down 0.4%. Oil trading near a 2-month high after breaking out of its recent trading range on an escalation in tensions in the Mideast and concerns over the rapid start to the Atlantic hurricane season. ExxonMobil shares today fell 0.7%. ADRs of BP up 0.9%. Chevron up 0.1%. Again, recapping records for the S&P, NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ 100 index. S&P ending the day at 5509, up 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Well, our next guest has spent more than 4,000 hours in space. She's been a part of 3 NASA missions, including a 6-month mission to the International Space Station that launched a day after her 50th birthday. She's got a new book out. It's called Sharing Space. It breaks down the insights that she found essential to her success, including knowing how to adapt when a role, down to the size of a spacesuit, does not have women in mind. Sharing Space, an astronaut's guide to mission, wonder, and making change, is out today. We've got with us Catherine Coleman joining us this afternoon. Catherine, Katie, how are you?
I am great, thank you, and thanks for the music. That was awesome.
Hey, all credit to Paul Brennan, our producer. He is the music whiz here. Congratulations on the book. I'm wondering, when you write a book like this, if you're thinking your entire career as it's happening, that one day you're going to put it in a book. Is that how it went for you?
No. And if it did, I would have definitely taken better notes, right? I would have been like written diaries and journals. And actually, it's something I really encourage the other folks. In fact, an author, Andy Chaikin, he begged me, he goes, Katie, we're up on that station, just talk into your iPhone. Okay, you don't have one of those. Talk into something, just little notes, anything that'll remind you of everything that you've been doing. Because I think, we all notice so much. And but I didn't expect to be writing a book, but in a way, as I retired a few years ago, and you kind of look back, and things haven't changed enough, and I decided a book was necessary.
And so, walk us through your process then, given that you didn't take notes at the time, you were probably busy doing space things, as I would imagine. What did this process look like? I would imagine, you went back to your former astronauts, people you shared the air with. Walk us through that a little bit, the tick-tock of how you actually did it.
Well, I really didn't want their side of the story, No, I did. In some ways, by being a retired astronaut, I get to go out and talk a lot and talk about my experiences. And I am somebody that actually kind of processes their life through talking, with others and makes decisions that way. And it's, I think what needed to be in the book got brought together by going out and doing these talks and looking out into audiences and realizing what was essential. Like I remember one group of women they were all like seniors in college being courted at the very big computer conference. I'm just so embarrassed of it's run out of my head. But mostly for women. And so, basically being their speaker and realizing that this was an audience of about 100 young women, all in computer science and engineering, and realizing that this is them. They are the future. And I have only like 20 minutes to impart to them things I think they really need to know. So the little moments like that, I think, really led to the book.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your career because it's been so interesting. A PhD from UMass Amherst. You went to MIT. ROTC was sort of your introduction into service, it sounds like. Can you start at give us the abridged version of how you found yourself, how you were able to become an astronaut? This is like every kid's dream, and I think a lot of adults' dreams too.
And not as many, I'd say, young girls as one might think, even these days. In our small town, our person that cuts hair, Hannah, on the door of her salon, kids are always drawing astronauts, and they're always girls, which is, I think, very cool.
We're gonna work on Katie's connection, which is ironic because I think she, at one point in her career, played an instrument from space on National Public Radio.
Yeah, it's
so
unfortunate.
I would imagine there was a connection.
We don't have that technology on Earth
when that
yet.
happened.
Yeah.
But we're going to get back to Katie Coleman. Her new book is An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. It's called Sharing Space. The book is out today. Katie,
Yeah.
did you want to be an astronaut when you were growing up?
No, never. I fear the ocean. I fear big wide spaces, and that includes space. But I do have a bunch of questions about just being an astronaut. We hear so much about, I feel like, the training, and it's just one of those things that I would love more insight in. How do you physically prepare to be in space? And then once you're in space, I don't know about you, Tim, I think you were kind of self-referencing that you're one of those adults that would like to be an astronaut.
Oh, yeah.
Once you're actually,
I think space is so cool.
Well, once you're actually in space, I mean, I feel like I watch those videos on YouTube all the time.
Of what?
Of what it's just like in the actual ship.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so amazing about where we are when it comes to space exploration is the NASA that Katie Coleman was a part of is so different than the NASA that exists today, and the rise of private enterprise that has emerged over the last, 20 years or so, that has replaced big parts of what NASA does. Look, NASA always relied on private companies to help innovate, but the way that it's relying on SpaceX now and potentially on Boeing for future missions is certainly something to speak of. Also the idea, I think, too, Katie Greifeld, is that more and more people who are not trained as astronauts by governments are getting an opportunity to go to space.
Yeah, private civilians without
Very
that
wealthy
training.
ones.
Very, very wealthy ones. We could name check a few billionaires there, but I mean, when it comes to that, just you think about the space race and the urgency and sort of the importance of it. It feels like this handover to those private companies, like you were mentioning about. I mean, is that the path forward? How do we continue to push out into space if you have agencies such as NASA running into these funding concerns and other things?
I think there's also an element too here of a global cooperation that exists in space that I think is not necessarily going to be there if we, for example, the space race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, obviously a big deal when the U.S. put a man on the moon first. But then you have cooperation with the building of the ISS and the development of the ISS. And then also when we were no longer using the space shuttle to bring people to the ISS, we as a country relied on on Russia and their Soyuz capsules to bring astronauts home.
And that was recent, correct?
Very recent, yeah.
Yeah, which is, I mean, kind of, it's maybe a good sign for humanity that when it comes to matters such as that, there is a degree of cooperation and working together. So there you go.
But there's also the rise of military branches as a result of space, like Space Force is a new branch of the military.
That's still around?
It's still around, yeah.
It's still around. I feel like we haven't talked about it in a while.
We haven't.
Space Force.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think about Elon Musk all the time. Obviously, we're at Bloomberg News, and I still spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I think about Elon Musk a lot, and I think about his big ambitions. I mean, he wants to go to Mars. He wants to die on Mars, pretty much. Like, he wants to live on Mars. And you think about just, I don't know, he's kind of made that his life's mission. He has incredible funds, and you think, I mean, is that what is going to take when you think about, again, sort of keeping the momentum and the ambition and vision of space exploration, if it's not the governments, and maybe it's the governments if they can, put their military apparatuses up there, but beyond that, when you think about just wanting to develop space, I do think it's an interesting question. Should that be the arena of billionaires?
Well, let's actually pose that question to Katie Coleman. We only have about a minute with you, Katie. Then we're going to do some news and we're going to come back. Katie and I just covered a lot there. I know you were working on your connection, but what do you make of the rise of private enterprise, companies like SpaceX and certainly Boeing to a lesser extent, supplanting a lot of what NASA has historically done?
The more the merrier, not to trivialize it, but more people in the game bringing their ideas, their new ways to do things, and doing them in concert. We talk about these companies as if they're alone, but they're often doing things with NASA, for NASA. And I think, each of these, we talk about the billionaires, but each of them has a vision and they have resources and they have, a vision of how to pave the way to space for more people. And each of those visions I find to be valuable. And I like to look, more at the substance than at the people there, and just to see what they're accomplishing. And I like what each of them are doing. The more people you bring up on orbit, the more people get that view and understand actually the magnitude of what we can do up there.
That view just seems incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that thought that it's almost like this gateway into igniting more people's ambition. The more people that can see that, the more people that will probably want to go up.
Hey, we're speaking right now with astronaut. Yeah, we have to, let's do some news, Katie, and then we're going to come back and do more with you. That's Katie Coleman. She's got a new book out. It's called Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. More with Katie Coleman in just a few minutes. First up, though, a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Amy.
All right, thank you, Tim. Former President Donald Trump's sentencing in his hush money case has been postponed until at least September 18th. The judge agreed to put it off while weighing the possible impact of a new Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. Trump had been scheduled to face sentencing next week, July 11th, on his New York felony conviction for falsifying business records. A House Democratic lawmaker is the first in the party to publicly call for President Biden to step down as the Democratic nominee for president. Representative Lloyd Doggett of Texas released a statement calling for Biden to withdraw. On Balance of Power today, Massachusetts Democratic Representative Seth Moulton says Biden has done some amazing things for the country.
But I've also never been one to shy away from speaking the truth. And I think we ultimately have to do what's best for our country and our democracy here. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't have all the right answers, but I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. The debate was bad.
Seth Moulton speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons. President Biden unveiling some rules to protect millions of workers from extreme heat, the deadliest form of extreme weather, killing hundreds of Americans every year. President Biden says the threat is just getting worse amid the climate crisis.
Everyone who willfully denies the impacts of climate change is condemning the American people to a dangerous future and either is really, really dumb or has some other motive.
If finalized, the rule will establish the nation's first ever federal safety standard for excessive heat exposure in the workplace. And it's expected to protect as many as 36 million indoor and outdoor workers. It would require employers to establish heat safety coordinators, undergo heat safety training, and create emergency heat response plans while providing workers with shade and water. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. It was a day of records on Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. A record for both the S&P, a record for NASDAQ, and yes, a record for the NASDAQ 100 index. S&P today up 33, finishing above 5,500, 5509, a gain today of just about 0.6%. We had the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 162, up by 0.4%. NASDAQ 18,028 is where that index closed today, a record up 149, up 0.8%. And we cannot ignore the NASDAQ 100 index up 199 points, closing at 20,011, up by 1%. NASDAQ 100 index also a record. Well, as for the overall market backdrop right now, specifically earnings and the outlook for the Federal Reserve, Sonu Varghese is global macro strategist at the Carson Group, and he was interviewed right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
Markets are expecting the Fed to, drop rates on the back of those disinflationary trends, which I think the Fed probably got spooked a little bit by the Q1 data, but as Powell said today, the disinflationary trend is back on.
Sonu Varghese of Carson Group. Again, S&P up 33 today at a record 5509, up 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.43% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.74%. Gold down 0.1%, 23.29 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.3%, 83.15 a barrel. Briefly, sources tell Bloomberg Robinhood Markets is considering offering cryptocurrency futures in the U.S. and Europe in coming months. On an update for the rest of the market, Robinhood shares fell 1.5%. Recapping, day of records, S&P up 0.6%, NASDAQ and the NASDAQ 100 index also at records. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. I want to get right back to Catherine Coleman. Her new book is out. It's called Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. If you're just now joining us, Katie Coleman spent more than 4,000 hours in space, 3 NASA missions, a 6-month mission to the ISS, launching a day after her 50th birthday. Katie, I want to get right back to just the experience of being in space, because not that many people have actually gotten to do it. I mean, we're talking fewer than 1,000 people. What was it like?
And it's one of the 2 main reasons that I wrote the book was that you're up there, and it's not just about the floating, you see my hair be big and we're floating around. It's about the fact that you fly from place to place. It's the only way to get around, and it kind of reminds you that you're in a place that almost nobody else is, and all the rules are different, which is extremely important for science and all the stuff we can learn up there. And at the same time, it's also a human thing to realize that you are one of, in this case, right now there's 12 people up in space on different space stations as we speak, and they're at the very edge.
I literally cannot imagine it, and I always wonder how people prepare themselves for things. How do you even prepare for an experience that you've never had before? I mean, what is the physical reality of training look like to get ready to be in space?
I think there's all that practicing. It's the reality of needing to be as safe as you can be. Spaceflight will never be safe, but we need to be as safe as we can, and that means you, as a crew member, being able to do your part. If this happens, we need to do this. If there's a fire alarm, you need to, don your mask and get to the main computer and take the certain steps. And so we practice those things, we drill them, and we're also, of course, graded and watched and observed, and that adds that extra tension that helps you make the mistakes that you might make on the real day when that stress comes from seeing actual smoke or realizing you might need to leave the space station really quickly. So we do practice all those things. We've got great, smart instructors, but then it is really just amazing to then be up there and be able to operate. And I think also to be able to be sort of mentally present as a human, that's another big important part to think about before you go.
Yeah, and again, so many things that I can't imagine about what you just said. seeing smoke in space and being able to control oneself is pretty remarkable. And I'm curious what it's like coming back, because you see clips on YouTube sometimes of astronauts coming back from space and they forget that they're in zero. There's gravity on Earth, and they drop whatever they're holding because they expect it to just float by them. I mean, have you had any experiences like that? What does the return trip actually look like?
Well, I would say the words sad, wild, and then just nice to be home. I really didn't want to leave. It takes a couple months to get good at the work up there, about not just understanding how to keep everything in its place and do all the experiments and get more done. It really has about a month-long learning curve. So you just want to stay and get more done. And I felt like my family would be there when I got home, and so I wanted to stay. So I was a little sad. It is, as Scott Kelly, I was on a crew with Scott, and he talked to us before we came home and talked to us about what landing was like. He said it's the best e-ticket ride you will ever go on. You're coming down, and spacecraft are built this way, where we have an ablative shield under the spacecraft. That means it's supposed to actually burn up, and pieces of burning spacecraft are supposed to go by the windows. Wow. And so knowing that is very comforting. Actually having it narrated and understanding what's happening. And he's like, and then parachute opening. And he looks at me and goes, Coleman, set a timer, parachute opening, because you need to make sure that you are not talking because it is so abrupt. And then that capsule is spinning and swinging, and it is really wild. And then it settles down, and then you're just watching the sort of the feet clock down, and you're realizing you're just going to hit the ground with a really big solid thunk, and you just hope you're not going to get dragged around by that parachute.
Hey, Katie, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the way that borders kind of melt in space. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, the ISS, for example, U.S. Space Agency, Roscosmos, Russian Space Agency, European Space Agency, Japan, Canada. Oftentimes you're with people from all over the world as an astronaut. And although countries might not get along on the ground, sometimes you're getting along in space. And I'm wondering what your experience was seeing the world kind of come together in space.
Being part of, not just the mission up there, but the getting ready. It's been my experience that, the governments say this is what we're going to do together, and there's formal agreements, but it is the people that really bring the mission together and make it happen, because it happens by having dinner with each other, by going for walks, by saying, what's your family like? Can I meet your family? And that's really what brought our crew together. And so being up there, especially in times like these, all I can say is, from what I understand, everyone is doing their job, and that means on the ground, that means the crew up in space, and not even thinking about not doing their job, because the mission itself is really, really clear. Up there, you are together as a crew, keeping each other safe. And, down here on the ground, we don't always agree with each other. I hear all about it on your show, and it's not easy. And sometimes you just have to put the things you can't agree about. They're not part of the mission right now, which is, in our case down here, figuring out how are we going to make sure that everybody can live safely down here on Earth.
All right, we don't have too much time left, but one thing we wanted to talk about is Mars. And we mentioned Elon Musk's lifelong dream is to colonize Mars. What are your thoughts on colonizing Mars, or actually putting humans on that planet eventually?
Absolutely, we will be doing that, and I think it's a good time for everybody to be thinking about it and how to do it, and even thinking, I like to think about settling Mars, which to me implies more like having a plan and going there together, and for one country to be the only country there doesn't seem like the right thing to me. And I think that comes from that view from the space station of looking back at the Earth. And you talked about dissolving borders. When I look back there, I see, first of all, I feel very close to home. But second, I see that everyone could be and actually is so connected if only they knew how much we could accomplish more together. And that includes doing the most important thing I think we'll do, which is colonizing and going off and settling on Mars.
Very, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing some of your journey with us. You can read more about Katie Coleman's journey in her new book out today. It's called Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. This is Business Week.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelletier. Eli Lilly's Alzheimer's treatment has been cleared in the U.S. as the second drug to slow progression of the mind-robbing disease that afflicts 6 million Americans. Lilly shares today declined, down by 0.8%. A source tells Bloomberg the Federal Trade Commission is poised to sue to block Tempur Sealy International's $4 billion proposed deal with mattress firm. The deal would combine Tempur Sealy, the world's largest mattress manufacturer, with top brands including Tempur-Pedic, Sealy Posturepedic, and Stearns & Foster, with the largest U.S. specialty retailer. Tesla reported its second consecutive drop in quarterly deliveries, though CEO Elon Musk has taken measures to stem the decline. Today we saw Tesla shares surge by 10.2%. And with more on Tesla's numbers, here's Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
A lot of the sell-siders, for what it's worth, basically say that the lineup is stale if you strip out Cybertruck, which is still ramping. You know, Model Y is the best-selling product model in the world, but it's now relatively old. There's not been a refresh or a new model. Of course, on August 8th, we will get a glimpse of Robotaxi, and during Investor Day, you see the PowerPoints with yet-to-be-unveiled models under canvas. So there's a belief that new models are coming.
Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. And again, today we've got Tesla shares up by 10.2%, rival Rivian up by 7%. Homebuilder stock analysts increasingly worried about signs of softening in key hotspots like Florida and Texas. Lennar shares today did move lower. Lennar was down today by 1.6%. And those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenovec. That's Kitty Greifeld in for Carol Masser, who's preparing for the 2024 Boston Pops fireworks extravaganza. We're going to be broadcasting that. I'm looking forward to it. Also,
thank you for
that voice. He's back. A man we haven't spoken to since last Thursday.
Since before the debate, right?
Since before the debate. Yeah. Doug Krisner.
What did you make of the debate?
What can I say?
Not
what
much.
can I say that hasn't been said?
Next question.
Next question.
It was certainly something.
It was something.
It was.
Not a lot of policy discussed.
Very little.
Very little policy.
A little bit of a golf game, but not a lot of policy.
We're not here to
And
reflect.
yesterday, they were talking about, if you look at the action of the bond market, although I really didn't buy into this, that they're already trying to imagine what a Trump presidency would mean.
You didn't buy into the steepening?
For the deficit. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
Whether tariffs mean higher inflation necessarily or tax cuts mean a wider deficit, and the market would obviously rebel, the bond market would rebel against that idea.
I keep asking about that.
Morgan Stanley was out with that note that it would translate into the steepener. Rate cuts in the near term, then the deficits would pressure the long and higher. But there's just so many variables. I feel like it's hard to really come up with the Trump trade right now.
So you were talking about Tesla earlier?
We were. Before we were talking about astronauts, we were talking about Tesla. So I think I thought the interpretation of today's move was better than feared in terms of vehicle deliveries.
Okay.
But you and I were chatting a little bit, and you said it could be, look at the other side of the trade.
Just people who were short the stock who had to cover today, and maybe that just created a little bit of a squeeze. I don't know. Yes, better than feared, but the business in China is still very weak. I think the authorities in China, when they tracked Tesla's sales for the month of June, I think they were down 24% year on year. And yesterday on our show, we were talking about the BYD numbers, which were a huge beat. And there's so much competition. It's cutthroat. I mean, and the way BYD is kind of getting more market share is with the aggressive price cuts. And Tesla began that exercise, right? And so now it's kind of extended through not just BYD, but a number of the Chinese EV makers. And Tesla, I think, is having a really tough time. In China.
I think the China example is an extreme sort of example of what Tesla's running into in the U.S. as well as there's more competition. They're not the only ones out there making pure play EVs right now. China, of course, has the added elements of their homegrown EVs. That's the industry that China wants to support. And when it comes to pricing, it's going to be hard to compete against that. But even still, I mean, some good news for Tesla. At least if you take a look at the stock price. Even still, though, the stock is down 7% year to date.
We were talking about this article in the New York Times, talking about the fact that maybe a lot of the apprehension that buyers in the United States may be having as it relates to Tesla vehicles has something to do with Elon Musk and his politics, whether that's starting to being a little bit of a drag. They surveyed like 7,500 Tesla owners, and they didn't have kind things to say about Musk or in the servicing operation. I mean, this is not a dealer network, right? So if you run into difficulty with your Tesla vehicle, I mean, servicing alone is a big challenge.
That certainly could be part of it. Another part could be that the vehicles, I think maybe people see as stale in the sense of they're having new models. It's been a couple of years since a new model, apart from the Cybertruck.
Apart from the Cybertruck.
Which still hasn't worked out well for them.
A niche vehicle, I think many would say. Hey, before we let you go, I do want to read a redhead that crossed just about 15